The box in Marcus Webb's hands weighed almost nothing. A child's drawing, his 7-year-old daughter had slipped it into his bag that morning without him knowing. A coffee thermos with a dent on the left side. And a single lanyard, the kind they give you on your first day, before anyone decides whether you belong. He walked through the glass lobby of Callaway Industries with the kind of stillness that made people step aside without knowing why. Somewhere behind him, on the 31st floor, a woman named Diana Callaway was standing at the window of her father's old office, her office now, watching the front entrance below. She had been told he was gone. That the problem had been handled. That the numbers would stabilize. What nobody told her was what had actually happened up there. What her team had done in her name, without her knowledge, to a man who had been quietly rebuilding the department she trusted most. Marcus reached the bottom step of the entrance. He set the box down on the concrete ledge. He pulled out his phone, and he made one call. What happened inside that building in the next 4 hours, nobody saw coming. Marcus Webb was not the kind of man who announced himself. He was 39 years old, broad-shouldered in the understated way of someone who had once carried more than his share of everything. He had a daughter named Isla, 7 years old, who collected smooth stones from the park near their apartment and lined them up on the windowsill in a specific order that she had never explained to him. He did not ask. He trusted that it made sense to her. His wife had passed 3 years ago, a brief and brutal illness that had moved faster than any of the doctors had prepared them for. Since then, Marcus had raised Isla alone, arranged his entire professional life around school pickup times and parent-teacher evenings, and quietly become one of the most capable operational analysts in the logistics sector without ever making it a talking point. When a recruiter called him about a senior analyst position at Callaway Industries 8 months ago, Marcus had done what he always did. He researched the company thoroughly, accepted the role at a salary 10% below market rate because it came with schedule flexibility, and showed up on his first day without expectations beyond doing good work. Callaway Industries was the kind of company that had been built by one person and was now being held together by another. The founder, Raymond Callaway, had died 18 months earlier, leaving the company, a supply chain and global logistics firm with operations across 14 countries, to his only daughter. Diana Callaway was 34. She had spent the previous decade working in international trade law before stepping into the role nobody thought she was prepared for. She had surprised nearly everyone. Almost everyone. There were people inside the company who had decided very early that Diana's tenure was temporary. That she would be managed, maneuvered, and eventually replaced by someone with the right connections and the patience to wait her out. The 31st floor operated as though the transition had already happened. In their minds, it had. Marcus had been placed under the operations division, reporting to a man named Conrad Hale. Conrad was 51, silver-haired, smooth in the particular way of someone who had learned to make self-interest sound like strategic vision. His inner circle consisted of 2 deputies, Sylvia Marsh, who handled internal reporting, and Evan Tate, who managed vendor communications and had a talent for being the loudest voice in any room he considered safe. On his first week, Marcus completed a compliance restructure that 3 other people had been working on for 6 weeks. He did not mention this. He simply filed it correctly and moved on. That was when Conrad began watching him. The pattern established itself slowly, the way these things always do when the people running them are careful. Any report Marcus produced that drew positive attention was absorbed into the team's shared output without attribution. Twice, he watched Sylvia forward his analysis directly to the executive floor with her name in the header. The third time, it was Evan who presented Marcus's restructured vendor data in the monthly leadership call, stumbling slightly over terminology that Marcus had coined himself. None of it was accidental. Marcus had seen versions of this before, in smaller companies, in underfunded departments where people treated recognition as a finite resource to be hoarded. But this was organized. It had the feel of something that had been practiced long enough to run without discussion. What he had not expected was how far they would go. 6 weeks into his role, Marcus flagged an anomaly in the Eastern distribution contracts, a pattern of billing irregularities across 3 vendor accounts that pointed to either a systemic processing error or something considerably worse. He documented his findings, cross-referenced them against 18 months of records, and submitted a formal internal report through the designated channel. The report was received by Conrad's office. It was never forwarded to the compliance team. 3 days later, Marcus received a revised version of his own report, restructured, with key findings softened and his name replaced by Evan Tate's, circulating through the leadership email chain as a preliminary vendor review. The billing anomaly he had flagged was described as a minor processing variance. No further action recommended. Marcus read the email, closed his laptop, and went to stand by the window for a moment. He had a daughter who lined stones on a windowsill in a specific order. He had learned from her that some things needed to be arranged carefully before they made sense. He began keeping a separate record. Every email. Every document. Every version comparison. Every timestamp. He kept it on a personal encrypted drive he accessed only from home, long after Isla was asleep and the apartment was quiet. He was not building a case. He was building a foundation, the kind you need before anything else can stand on it. The moment that changed the shape of everything came on a Tuesday morning in his 9th week. Marcus was called into Conrad's office at 8:15. Sylvia and Evan were already there. A woman from the legal team named Priya sat at the far end of the table with an expression that Marcus recognized immediately, the practiced neutrality of someone delivering a decision they did not make. Priya told him that a significant data breach had occurred within the vendor compliance system. That access logs showed the breach had originated from Marcus's credentials. That the company could not, given the severity of the incident, continue his employment. Marcus asked to see the logs. Conrad said they were under legal review and unavailable at this time. Marcus asked if there was an appeal process. Priya said the termination was immediate. Marcus looked at the document in front of him for exactly 4 seconds. Then he signed it, asked for his copy, thanked Priya by name, and walked back to his desk. He placed Isla's drawing, the dented thermos, and the lanyard into the small box that had been left beside his chair. He carried it to the elevator. He rode it to the lobby. He walked through the front entrance into the pale morning light. And nobody who watched him leave would have guessed that he had spent the last 6 weeks preparing for exactly this moment. Diana Calloway had been in the building since 6 that morning. She did this 3 or 4 times a week, arrived before anyone else, made coffee in the executive kitchen, and spent the first hour reading through operational summaries that she suspected were being filtered before they reached her. She had not yet been able to prove this. She had only the feeling, the particular instinct of someone who had spent a decade reading contracts for what they concealed as much as what they stated. She was reading a vendor compliance brief when her assistant knocked and told her there was someone on the main legal line asking for her directly. Not for her office. For her. He said his name is Marcus Webb, her assistant said. He said he worked here until about 40 minutes ago. Diana set down the brief. Something about the phrasing, until about 40 minutes ago, made her pick up the line herself. The call lasted 9 minutes. Marcus did not speak quickly. He did not use emotional language. He presented what he had observed, what he had documented, and what he believed the access logs, if properly examined, would reveal. He told her about the vendor anomaly report. He told her about the version that had been substituted. He told her about the timestamps on his personal encrypted record that predated every altered document by days. He said he was not calling to dispute the termination. He was calling because there was a billing irregularity across 3 vendor accounts that had been deliberately suppressed, and the company he had spent 9 weeks inside deserved to know what was sitting beneath it. He said one more thing before the call ended. He said, "I have a daughter. I don't have time to chase something that isn't real. This is real." Diana sat in her father's chair, the chair she still thought of as his, for a long moment after the line went quiet. Then she called her general counsel. Then she called her head of IT security. Then she asked her assistant to locate every record, every access log, every internal communication from the operations division for the past 12 months and place it under immediate hold. Downstairs, through the glass front entrance, the lobby was already beginning to change, though the people on the 31st floor did not yet know it. Conrad Hale arrived at his usual time. He moved through the morning with the confidence of a man who believed the problem had been resolved. Sylvia reviewed her calendar. Evan was already in the break room telling a story that was getting a good reaction. None of them had been informed of any change. The building continued exactly as it had been. That was exactly how Diana intended it. Diana sat in the boardroom with her general counsel, 2 members of the legal team, and the head of security, watching the preliminary findings come together page by page. What emerged was not what she had expected. The data breach attributed to Marcus Webb had originated from his credentials. That part was accurate. But the originating device did not match any terminal Marcus had ever logged in from. The IP address resolved to a workstation registered to Evan Tate. Someone had obtained Marcus's access credentials and used them from Evan's machine. It was not a sophisticated operation. It had worked because the people executing it had never been seriously examined before. But the breach was not the most significant thing the review uncovered. The vendor irregularity Marcus had flagged was real. And it was not minor. Across 3 supplier accounts over 19 months, there was a pattern of invoice approvals that did not match the corresponding delivery records. The discrepancy across those accounts totaled slightly above $2.3 million. The approvals had been authorized at mid-management level, routed, in every instance, through Conrad Hale's office. The compliance report Marcus had originally submitted, the one that had been suppressed and replaced with a softened version, had identified this pattern with specific reference to the relevant account numbers. That report existed in its original form on Marcus's encrypted personal drive, time-stamped 11 days before the altered version appeared in the company's internal system. Diana read through the findings without expression. Her counsel watched her carefully. She asked 2 questions. The first was how long the altered documentation would have gone undetected if Marcus had not made that call. Her counsel said, conservatively, another 8 to 12 months. Possibly longer. The second question was whether anyone outside the operations division had seen the original report before it was suppressed. The answer was no. It had been contained entirely within Conrad's chain. Diana closed the folder. She looked at the window for a moment, the same window Marcus had stood beside on the day he received the altered email with his work inside it wearing someone else's name. She thought about what it cost a person to do what Marcus had done. To build a careful record in silence, to carry a box out through a front entrance without raising his voice, and then to call the one person who might actually do something with the information, not for himself, but because the problem was real. She thought about what he had said. *I have a daughter. I don't have time to chase something that isn't real, *. She picked up her phone. She called Marcus directly. She told him she needed him to come back to the building. Not as a terminated employee. As the person who had found what her company's own systems had failed to surface. There was a pause on the line. Then Marcus said, "I need to pick up my daughter at 3:15. Diana almost smiled. She said, "This will be finished before 3. The glass front entrance reflected the pale afternoon sky when Marcus walked back through it. This time he carried nothing. No box. No bag. He rode the elevator to the 31st floor and walked through the operations division without looking at Conrad's office. People noticed. People looked. He kept walking to the far conference room where Diana Calloway was waiting. He had not met her before. In 9 weeks of working in the building, their paths had simply never crossed. She was standing when he entered, not behind the table, just standing in the open space of the room, which told him something about how she preferred to operate. She looked at him for a moment with the focused attention of someone who had been reading a document and was now reading the person behind it. She extended her hand. She thanked him for coming back. Marcus sat down. What followed was the most direct conversation he had participated in since joining the company. Diana walked him through the findings. She did not soften them. She confirmed the fabricated breach, the suppressed report, and the financial irregularity his original analysis had identified. And then she told him the number $2.3 million. Marcus sat with that for a moment. He had known the irregularity was significant. He had not known the full scale until now. Conrad's been here 11 years, he said. Not as a defense. As an observation. Diana said she understood that. She said it did not change what the record showed. She asked him if he was willing to provide a formal statement to the legal team about his original report and the sequence of events that followed. She said his statement would be part of the documentation submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies alongside the company's own findings. Marcus said yes. Then he asked the question that had been sitting quietly at the back of everything. The 3 vendor accounts, he said. Who approved them on the supplier side? Diana's counsel looked at her. She nodded slightly. The answer was that 2 of the 3 accounts were registered to holding companies that dissolved within months of the final invoice approval. The 3rd was still active. They were still tracing the ownership structure. Conrad had not been operating alone. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He thought about Isla's stones on the windowsill. The way she arranged them in a specific order that she had never explained. He had always trusted that it made sense to her. He thought about the fact that he had been inside this company for 9 weeks and had stumbled into something that had apparently been running for nearly 2 years, and that the only reason it had surfaced now was because someone had made the mistake of trying to use him as the exit door. There are moments when the shape of something finally becomes clear. When what you have been looking at from one angle suddenly reveals a different dimension entirely, this was one of those moments. The company-wide meeting was called for the following morning at 9. Diana stood on the small raised platform in the main atrium with the specific stillness of someone who had been preparing for a moment like this, not this exact moment, but a moment that required her to say true things clearly. She did not use notes. She thanked the company for its work. She told them that a review of operations division records had uncovered a sustained pattern of financial misconduct and deliberate document manipulation, and that the relevant personnel had been placed on suspension pending regulatory review. She said the legal process would be transparent and thorough. She said one more thing before she stepped down. She said that a compliance analyst who had been wrongfully terminated the previous day had identified the original irregularity and chosen to report it rather than simply walk away. She said that kind of integrity was not a small thing. It was the only reason they were standing here with the full picture instead of discovering it through an external audit 18 months from now. She did not name Marcus publicly. He had asked her not to. What she did was reinstate his position, adjust his title to reflect the scope of work he had actually been performing, and send him a formal letter of offer, not to his company email, which had been deactivated, but to his personal address. He received it at 2:47 in the afternoon. He read it sitting in his car outside Isla's school, waiting for the doors to open. Isla came out at 3:18, 3 minutes late, with a smudge of green paint on her left hand that she showed him immediately and with great satisfaction. He asked what she had made. She said a forest. He said he would very much like to see it. They drove home with the radio on low. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table while Isla arranged her newest stone, a pale gray piece of quartz she had found near the school gate, into its place on the windowsill. He watched her move 2 others to make room for it, the deliberate patience of someone who knew exactly where each thing belonged. He had replied to Diana's offer with 2 words before leaving the school car park. I accept. The following Monday, he returned to Callaway Industries carrying his coffee thermos, the one with the dent on the left side. He was shown to a new office on the 31st floor, 2 doors down from Diana's. The view looked out over the city in the particular way that upper floors do, wide and unobstructed. He sat down, opened the first file in the regulatory submission, and got to work. Over the weeks that followed, a quiet but significant restructuring moved through the company. Conrad Hale and 4 members of his team were formally terminated. The vendor accounts were fully traced, the irregularity referred to external authorities. The compliance reporting system was rebuilt from the ground up, with a direct channel to the executive floor that could not be rerouted through mid-management. Diana and Marcus did not become friends immediately. They became something more functional than that, 2 people who had seen what the other was made of in a situation designed to obscure exactly that. She respected the way he worked. Thorough, unhurried, without performance. He respected the way she led. Direct, without theater, willing to make the difficult call and say the true thing. There was an afternoon in the 4th week when they were both still in the building at 7 in the evening, working through the final regulatory documentation at the conference table. Diana looked up at one point and asked him why he had called her specifically. Not the board. Not the regulator. Her. Marcus considered the question. He said because the company had been built by her father and she was the one running it, and if someone inside it was doing something that damaged both of those things, she deserved to be the first to know. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, most people would have just filed a complaint and left. Marcus said, I have a daughter. I'm trying to teach her that leaving isn't always the right answer. Diana looked at the table for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just the slight release of something that had been held carefully in place for a long time. She did not say anything else. But she remembered it. The box Marcus had carried out through the front entrance sat in the back of his car for nearly 2 weeks before he thought to bring it up. One evening, after the building had emptied, he rode the elevator down to the parking level, retrieved it, and carried it to his office. He set the thermos on the desk. He filed the documents he had accumulated. Anisla's drawing, the one she had slipped into his bag without telling him, the one that had been inside that box through all of it, he unfolded carefully and set it against the base of the desk lamp where he could see it. It was a drawing of 2 figures standing in front of a building. One tall. One small, with green on her hands. A person is not remembered for the moment they are wronged. They are not even remembered for the moment they are vindicated. They are remembered for what they chose to do with the truth when they finally had it, who they protected, what they made right, and what kind of place they helped leave behind. Marcus Webb had walked out through a glass entrance carrying almost nothing. He had walked back in carrying everything that mattered. The work had just begun. But it had begun honestly. And that was the only foundation that had ever held anything of real value.